Recently, my team and I were engaged in a project of doing multiple security assessments across a very large organization. As part of this, we had to audit a whole bunch of Kubernetes clusters. I'm not talking about one or two different Kubernetes clusters. We had to audit hundreds of them. And obviously, manually doing this job or doing this job in a way that was even partially manual would be not only an extremely time consuming activity, but it would also be a financially infeasible activity. Which is why we fired up Claude Agent SDK, built us up a quick agent, and we were able to audit all of those clusters in no time whatsoever. If you've been following anything in AI, you will know that Claude Code is one of the most popular tools to help developers build applications. In fact, Claude Code is so popular that there are literally thousands upon millions of conversations dedicated to it on X and Reddit and so on. Developers are building solutions on top of it. Teams have started using it extensively within the enterprise and all of that stuff. So, Claude Code is one of the most powerful agent harnesses that you can use to build coding based solutions where you can build applications and build different types of applications. The Claude team clearly realized that Claude Code cannot just be used to build applications, it can be used for any kind of general purpose agent, which is to do any kind of task which involved talking to an API or accessing the file system or doing any one of those things, which is why they built Claude Agent SDK. Claude Agent SDK is a powerful harness that allows you to leverage either Python or TypeScript code. So you can script up and programmatically use Python or TypeScript in order to call Claude Code and then perform whatever agent tasks that you need to do. An agent task could be anything like, of course, writing an application or building an application to building some kind of an agent that would do travel booking, scheduling, email management, or any of these things as a general purpose agent. An agent typically involves the use of an LLM tools and multiple other capabilities that Claude Code provides already. So they decided to add an SDK on top of it and make it a fully functional agent harness that will allow you to use Claude Code and the capabilities provided by that in a more meaningful way. This is where Claude Agent SDK comes in. Claude Agent SDK is something I've been using for a while now. For the last nearly 2 or 3 months, I've been using Claude Agent SDK, and I found that it's super powerful to build out any kind of agentic solutions. And I've been diving deep into it. I've been building solutions for my own company and for my customers. Today, I'm going to be giving you a quick intro of Claude Agent SDK. And I'm going to take you through a very simple example of how you can use Claude Agent SDK to build a very, very comprehensive Kubernetes security auditing system, not just an agent, but a full-fledged auditing system. And we'll see some outputs from that. So we'll get started with the demo next. Now in here, I'm going to explain to you how you can build out an agent like this in Claude Agent SDK that can help you do anything. In this case, I've built a Kubernetes security audit system simply because I am in security and I work in the security domain. But whatever domain you want, an agent like this can help you do that task and get it done with the Agent SDK. I'm going to be specifically using the Python version of the Agent SDK. There is a TypeScript version as well, which I've heard is also quite good. I'm going to be using the Python SDK since I write most of my code in Python. So with that, I'm going to get started and explain to you the different parts of the code, and I'll show you how easy it is to get this going with Claude Agent SDK in Python. First of all, we have to import a few packages. Let me show you what are the packages we're going to be importing, which are basically largely this. From a Claude standpoint, we're going to be importing these packages. Now, these packages, you can install them when you install Claude Agent SDK. I've installed this version of Claude Agent SDK, and that's what you get when you install this. When you install this, you get all of, in this case, I'm going to be using these limited options or these limited imports for my code, but you might have other things that you need to do with it. One of the important things that I've done here is I've also done a logging system with Loguru, just logs the messages on console, just easier to read than just a print statement. And I've also loaded my environment variables from here. I don't need to show you those environment variables. If you have Claude and Claude Code, you can set it up pretty easily without too much difficulty. I'm just loading those environment variables here. This is basically the imports part, and I'm going to cover this part a little bit later because you'll see a whole bunch of tools there, and I'll cover this part a little bit later. So the entry point function is basically this, which I've called audit the cube. Now, audit the cube essentially has a system prompt Now, this in Claude Code, you would typically see this as Claude.md, right? So you would have a Claude.md, which would be your project level memory setting. This is the system prompt that I'm using. Now, you'll see that the system prompt is pretty sparse. In fact, there's not much going on here. You just have basic instructions about the fact that, hey, you're tasked to audit a Kubernetes cluster. The kubeconfig is in the user's home directory, which is where most kubeconfigs are. kubectl is already set up. So kubectl or kubectl or whatever you want to call it is already set up. And there's a very interesting line I've used here, which makes the big difference between a good job done by Claude Agent SDK versus a not so good job. So I have given this agent a skill. Now I'm going to talk about the skill a little bit later. And this really separates and makes it an important thing, because without this skill, this agent would not do a very good job, or would do a passable job or lower than average at best. But this skill takes it to the next level and makes this agent perform in an excellent way, in a more comprehensive way. And that's really what we're doing. We have a skill that we've built called the K8S Security Audit skill. And this is something that you'll be getting as part of the GitHub repository I'll share in the show notes. So you can have a look at this when you want. So think of a skill at a high level like a recipe, right? It has a bunch of instructions, it has a step by step process as to how to do it. And that's basically, think of it like a knowledge base for the agent to use. And that's what the skill is. And then execute based on the skill. I've also used a memory MCP server. So if you don't know what an MCP server is, an MCP server exposes different tools to an agent. In this case, I have exposed an MCP server that has a whole bunch of tools that relates to memory. Now, the reason why I use this MCP server is simply because I want to track a to-do list in Claude Agent SDK. So I want to say that, okay, this is my set of to-dos that I need to track, and I go and check them off every single time. Claude automatically does that for me and manages that. So I'm using that so that it completes the job correctly as intended and doesn't just flake out somewhere in the middle or decide to terminate the process prematurely. So that's why I use the memory MCP server. There are multiple different types of memory MCPs that you can use. Again, that's really up to you as to what kind of a server that you would want to use. Perform a thorough audit, and once you're done, create a detailed security audit report in the format in the current working directory, right? So that's what I'm doing. The user section or the user prompt is nothing much. I've just said perform an audit, don't spare an inch. This is an important part, and this really has a whole bunch of things that you need to go over. First of all, you would ideally not want to run things in bypass permissions mode. I'm just doing it because I need this tool to access a whole bunch of things, and I'm using it just to test this stuff out. So I'm using bypass permissions. If you're using bypass permissions, which is fine, but use it in a sandbox or in some kind of a sandbox environment. Don't just run it on your local machine, because Claude sometimes will start deleting stuff or might start accessing paths that it's not supposed to access, doing tasks that it's not supposed to do. So you might want to keep this limited. You have multiple permissions modes in Claude Agent SDK. You have the accept edits. You have a bunch of other modes that you can use. Bypass permissions obviously is the God mode, gives you access. You don't need to approve any action. Permission mode also is way more applicable when you're working on Claude Code and you are interacting with the agent. But in the case of Claude Agent SDK, in most cases, you're building a programmatic agent. You're not really interacting with the agent in the typical sense of the term, which is why you tend to provide slightly elevated privileges to the agent. Which is why bypass permissions, if you're using, please try and use it in a sandbox and not on any machine that is directly associated with any kind of data. Use it in a sandbox machine or a separate VM or something like that. The other thing, so we have used the system prompt, which is the instructions from here, allowed tools. Now, these are the tools I've given it, I've approved as part of this. Now, these are all the tools that Claude has by default, or Claude Agent SDK, Claude Code gives you by default. I have allowed it to use all of this. For this, I would say that 4 or 5 of these tools are not necessary, but I'm just showing you what you can do with it. That's why I've enabled all of them. The other thing I've done is enabled an MCP server. In this case, I've enabled it the server memory, which is directly from Anthropic, which is the server memory. It just tracks things. It maintains a memory of the agent and what it's doing and keeps adding stuff. The to-do list basically is tracked by this server memory, which writes it to a file in the local machine. So that's how it works. So then once you declare the options, which is the Claude Agent options, you then go ahead and set up the agent to actually work in interactive mode, right? So in this case, you're going to run the agent here. you're doing this perform Kubernetes audit, which is the user prompt. And then from here, you have a bunch of messages that the agent spits out. Just like in Claude Code or just like in any other interactive agent, it spits out a bunch of messages. There are assistant messages, there are system messages, there are thinking messages, and so on. The reason I'm using this is I want to print out the assistant message text blocks and thinking blocks. I just want to show how things are actually running. So the idea is that once this is all done, it should just write a report into the current working directory, which I have set up as this one, which is my current working directory. Now, one thing we forgot to mention, and this is very important, is the skill. Now, the skill is one of the most important parts of this project. I've created a directory called .claude/skill/K8s security audit. And this is a skill. I can create any number of skills under the skills directory, just like a .github workflows directory. I can create any number of skills there. The skill is typically referenced by an entry point file called the skill.md. This is just a markdown file that has notations here for name and description, and then it has a very comprehensive process. I've written out a very comprehensive process. Think of it like a SOP for an agent, right? So this is a operating procedure for an agent to run and perform whatever it needs to perform, or whatever it needs to do, and you give it all the instructions, all the commands, all of that stuff. So in this case, you'll see that there's a step-by-step thing that it's an 8-9 step process where it goes through each of these different steps and performs the audit based on the steps. Aside from that, you can have additional scripts, you can have reference files, you can have other assets like an audit report template, all of that stuff in here. And so all the agent has to do is discover this skill. So since I've given it the setting source of project, it needs to discover this directory in this particular working directory. And if it discovers it, and if you have referred to it, in this case, I've explicitly referred to it saying that use this skill, there is a more than good chance that it will just take it and it will start using that skill to perform the Kubernetes security audit. So this is really all it takes to run a super deep dive, super extensive audit of Kubernetes cluster using Claude Agent SDK. I've already set up my cluster. You'll see that there are a bunch of pods running in the cluster. I'm already running the cluster. So I'm just going to run this. I'm going to run uv run main.py. So this will start my agent. I'm going to pause some parts of it and explain when certain messages come up to show you what that actually means from a perspective. So first thing you'll see is that Claude has started doing and said, I'll help you perform a security audit. Then it says invoking the skill. So it says it automatically recognizes the skill. It says that, hey, I'm going to use the memory MCP server to track the to-dos, and then it's going to start with each step. So there are 8 steps before it writes a report, basically 9 steps. So the step 1 is it checks whether it can access the cluster in the first place. It checks whether it can actually access the cluster. You will see this warning coming up because there are some long-running commands that are there. So that's why you'll see the pre-flight check is going to take some time, but that's just a warning, nothing to worry about. So you'll see that the first one is to see whether Claude even has access. So, and then it says, yes, I have cluster connectivity. I'm going to proceed to stage 2 and so on. So I'm going to pause here and get back when Claude has more to say, as it has more to say. Now you'll see that step 3 is done, which is information gathering. Step 2 is done. Step 3 has started, which is RBAC analysis. Now, this is a very important aspect, which is basically going to analyze the access control system. And if you see the skill, you will actually see what it's going to do in terms of RBAC analysis. It's going to try and use different commands to be able to access RBAC. And then it says it also found a critical finding and so on. So it performs all of this stuff. It might also have scripts that might do additional things. It has a specialized RBAC. We have written a specialized RBAC analysis resource that can help it perform a more detailed RBAC analysis. So that's what's really happening in step 3. Now you'll see it started with step 4, which is pod security assessment. So this is probably auditing the sections related to the pods, which is going to be looking at different types of pod specifications and looking for whether those pods have certain risky parameters enabled and so on. So it's doing the pod security assessment in step 4. So you'll see that it's actually doing probably a much more thorough audit than most humans would do. Even people with a good deal of expertise in Kubernetes and Kubernetes security would probably not do such a thorough and thought out audit. And remember, one of the cool things with using AI agents for this sort of use case is that they will automatically adapt to changing situations based on what they can access and so on. So you'll see that network policy review probably got done very quickly. There are not too many pods in here. Probably there are no network policies enabled at all, which is why it finished the reviews pretty quickly. And then it went on to the step 6, which is secrets management. So it's able to adapt to different conditions very quickly, different situations very quickly. It's able to adapt in a human like way, at the same time being able to automate all of this. Just a quick thought before this completes. The other thing you can do is break this up into different sub agents. So one of the things I could have done if I'd liked is taken this main agent that I have here, broken it up into 7 different or 6 different or 8 different sub agents depending on the number of steps, and then fed all of that so that it could parallelize all those checks. I'm going to cover those sort of things in next videos, but in this I just wanted to show you a simple example of how this would work. So now you'll see that all 8 steps are done. It's even finished the CIS benchmark checks, and it is going to start writing this report into the local current working directory, and I'll come back to you when that is done. All right, this Kubernetes security audit has been done. It's been completed, and it has identified a whole bunch of things. It has identified some critical risks, some high, medium, and low risks. So you can see some of the summary information right here. And it has also written it to a report on my local machine. So let me actually convert it to a PDF for easier reading. Oh, looks like there's some issue with my Panda. Anyway, let's just render it here. And remove this. So you'll see that this was generated as a report. So you'll see the separate sections. Again, this is all based on those assets. So you'll see the report template. This is based exactly on that report template. So you will see that shows up everywhere here, simply because that is the report template it uses to generate. So it makes it a lot more powerful in your case, simply because you can feed it a specific template and even generate based on that specific template. So you'll see that all of this is there, namespaces, so on. The workloads, 20 different pods, network policy 0, which is why obviously it took very little time to do the network analysis. So you'll see that service account with full cluster admin access. You'll see a whole bunch. You'll see privileged container host file system access, and it gives you the evidence of that. So you'll see that this is a very competently performed security audit of the entire Kubernetes cluster. And of course, if I use sub-agents, I can start parallelizing this at massive scale with very little time. Just by writing a single SOP, feeding it to an agent, I have a very, very usable set of parameters that I can use. Of course, it's ideal that you do some level of validation to ensure that it's not all off. You can use other parameters to do LLM as judge and so on, but even if you don't, this is based on pretty strong parameters. It is based on pretty strong skills. So you should see that it's not going to just throw random false positives at you. So this is really how easy it is to spin up Claude Agent SDK and run a very useful, very complicated task in a very, very easy way. In this case, with just skills. We have not used any tools or any specialized tools. We've just used skills with specific scripts, and that's completed our entire task for us. So with that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you like this sort of content, please do subscribe, and please like this video. It helps with the algorithm. Thank you so much.